Hey friends. Tonight, we begin with a path forgotten by time, where the grass grows taller than memory, and the wind speaks only in sighs. Somewhere in the woods beyond the boundary stones, hidden by thorn and fog, lies the old mill. No one visits it now, no one dares. But just once a bride walked past its door. She never returned. So, before you let your breath soften, before your room falls into shadow, and the fan begins its quiet hum, ask yourself, what would make an entire village? Pretend someone never existed. Tonight, we travel to Eldhollow, a place so small it slipped off maps, and so quiet. Even the crows forgot to land there. But every place has its secrets, and in Eldhollow, it begins with a wedding. Not a royal wedding, not a noble one, just a village ceremony, modest, honest, and desperately hopeful. The bride's name was Letha, daughter of the cooper. Hair like sun-dried wheat, and eyes the green of summer moss. People said she laughed in a way that made the goats stop chewing, that she sang while weaving, and never once missed a knot. She was young, but not foolish. Strong from labor, gentle in speech. Everyone agreed she would make a fine wife. Her betrothed was Aldrich, a blacksmith's apprentice, broad-shouldered but soft-spoken. He walked with a slight limp from a firewood accident and spoke more to dogs than people. But he loved Letha. You could tell by the way he looked at her when he thought no one noticed. The entire village prepared. There were no written invitations. Only whispers passed from house to house. News traveled on the breeze, carried in baskets and bread loaves and borrowed firewood. The priest polished his goblet. The midwife baked 3 loaves. Even old widow Marn stitched a fresh patch into her only cloak. The wedding was to take place under the ash tree near the commons. It had stood longer than any building, its roots deep, twisted, and sacred. Birds nested in its arms. Children carved initials in its bark. Elders claimed it whispered dreams in the wind. But that morning, the tree stood alone. Letha was gone. At first it was shrugged off. Maybe she woke early. Maybe she was picking flowers. Maybe her mother needed help dressing. Maybe. But the sun climbed higher. The priest began to pace. Aldrich stood motionless, hands clasped, jaw clenched. The ash tree cast a long shadow. And still no Letha. A group of boys was sent to check the road. The thatcher's son ran to the cooper's house. The midwife held Aldrich's hand and told him it would all be fine. But even she didn't believe it. By midday, panic settled like mist. Her home was empty. Her shoes were gone. The rushes she braided for her crown sat untouched. The hearth was cold. The only thing missing besides the girl was her ribbon. A strip of blue linen, embroidered with tiny white threads. A gift from Aldrich. He had spent a week's wage on the dye. Then came the rumor. Someone, a stable boy, or maybe the baker's niece, claimed they saw Letha walking past the village edge that morning, barefoot, ribbon in her hair, headed east, toward the mill. No one said it out loud, but the air changed. A tension like winter frost settling on the backs of necks. The old mill it hadn't turned in years. Not since the wheel cracked. Not since the last miller disappeared. Not since the night the river ran red. Though no one could quite agree on how or why. Some say it was rust. Some say it wasn. Single quotes to no one used the path anymore. The trees had swallowed it. Brambles crept across it like the village wanted to forget it ever existed. But Letha had walked that way, and she had not come back. Aldrich did not wait for the priest. He did not wait for permission. He left the wedding square, still dressed in his best tunic, boots caked with dew and panic, and walked east, alone. He was gone for 3 days. No one followed. Some said they heard screams from the woods. Others heard nothing at all. Some claimed they saw a flicker of candlelight from the top floor of the mill, long boarded shut. When Aldrich returned, he was different. He said nothing, not to his parents, not to the priest, not even to the cooper, who sat each evening staring at the horizon, hoping to see his daughter's silhouette coming home. Aldrich moved out of his family's home and into the forge, slept on coal sacks, ate sparingly, never smiled. He refused to speak of the mill. refused to speak of Letha. But some nights, he walked to the edge of the woods and left something beneath the ash tree. Once it was a ribbon, once a carved wooden ring, once just a candle burning down into the grass. The village moved on. It always did. A new harvest came. Then winter. Then another spring. Babies were born. Goats escaped fences. The cooper died. And no one ever spoke Letha's name again, except the blacksmith's boy, who sometimes heard Aldrich mutter it in his sleep. Letha, don't go in the door. But the story doesn't end there, because last week, for the first time in 27 years, the mill wheel turned. A single, groaning rotation. Enough to splash water. Enough to stir mud. The priest heard it from his window. The midwife's daughter saw it from the creek. And the next morning under the ash tree was a shoe dot, small, worn, covered in moss inside. It, a scrap of blue ribbon, the priest called it. A coincidence. The villagers call it a sign. The midwife calls it a warning. But Aldrich packed his hammer, a lantern, and a piece of bread. And without a word, he walked east again, toward the mill. This time, he did not return. No one looked, no one asked, and the wheel turned again. Twice. Some say the mill is alive, that it feeds on stories, on memories, that every forgotten name becomes a cog, every silence a gear. Others believe it's haunted, that the ghost of the miller's daughter still waits inside, her braid nailed to the wall, her eyes hollow as empty grain. Sacks, but the truth is never spoken, only whispered at night, only felt when the wind shifts, only remembered when the millstone hums low and slow and steady. They say if you press your ear to the ground outside its door, you can hear her, not Letha, not the miller's daughter, the mill itself, grinding, turning, waiting. The wheel hadn't moved in years, but now it turned slowly, deliberately, like something beneath the surface was waking. Water trickled down moss-covered paddles, though the stream had long since run dry. No one had touched it. No one dared. The mill stood as it always had, hunched and brooding at the edge of the trees, its warped timbers groaning with the weight of decades. But something had shifted. Not in the building, no, in the air itself. The stillness that used to surround it had become ... alert. The door remained closed, but the latch was smeared with a pale print. Not dirt, not ash, something else. A residue cold to the touch, like dew that had forgotten. It belonged to morning. Inside, silence clung, like cobwebs. The lantern Aldrich carried lay shattered on the floor. Wax pooled near the threshold, still soft at the edges, as though the flame had only just gone out, and beside it his boots, placed side by side, carefully, almost reverently. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken boards. Just his boots, his hammer, his silence, and the door in the back wall. Not many had ever seen it. Most villagers didn't know it existed. Those who did pretended otherwise. Short and narrow, framed in stone so old it crumbled at the edges, the door looked like it belonged to another time or another place. It was sealed once, but not anymore. Faint markings ran across its symbols, etched deep into the wood, deeper than any chisel could go. They pulsed faintly in the dim light, not glowing, not bright, but somehow alive. It was cracked open just an inch, just wide enough to show a dark hollow behind it. Cold air seeped through, and something else, a smell, not rot, not mildew. Memory. It smelled like the cooper's house when Letha was alive, like crushed lavender, sweat, and warm bread. And behind that something sharp, like iron. The wheel turned again. Just once, in the village, they heard it. Even the priest paused mid-sermon, but no one moved, because the last time someone followed that sound, he did not return. At the base of the old ash tree, someone left a bowl. Clay, uneven, filled with milk and a single violet flower. No one saw who placed it, but the villagers saw the footprint in the mud beside it, smaller than a man's barefoot, and heading toward the trees. They didn't speak of it at supper, but Doors were barred early that night. Candles burned low in windowsills, not for light, but for defense. Even the children knew better than to ask, because something had changed again, and deep in the woods. Beneath the mill, far below the spinning wheel, something listened. They say the mill was built atop older stone, that long before grain was ever ground there, something else turned in the dark. Not a wheel but a ring of names, a circle of promises. The midwife remembers. She's old now, skin soft as parchment, eyes clouded but steady. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, her voice sounds like dried leaves falling on stone. She remembers the night Ilse vanished. The village said it was the river, but the midwife saw her climb the path. She followed her, not closely, but close enough to see the girl pause before the mill and place something on the ground. A locket, a lock of her own hair. A single word written in ashdot. She saw the wheel turn though no water flowed, and she heard the sound, a breath like stone exhaling. The next day, Ilse was gone, and the old mill door was shut tight. But the markings had changed. The midwife wrote them down, hid them inside the pages of her herbal journal, beneath dried thyme and chamomile. She never showed anyone, not even the priest, especially not the priest, because she remembered what her grandmother said, that the land doesn't forget, that it holds memories the way the ocean holds shipwrecks, quietly, hungrily, and now, the land is stirring. In the village, children have begun to talk in their sleep, muttering in a language their parents don't know. They wake with dirt under their nails and petals in their hair. One girl drew the mill in charcoal on her wall, every detail. Shingles missing, ivy in the window, the strange door on the back wall. When asked how she knew, she only said, "I've been there." She had never left her bed. The midwife has started leaving offerings again. Milk, coins, a cracked mirror. She says it's to keep the path closed, but others think it's to keep the path open, because sometimes the only way to keep something from taking is to give it something first. The priest, meanwhile, has fallen silent. He still rings the bell, still lights the candles, but he no longer preaches. Instead, he writes dozens of pages, bound in twine, covered in names, many of them crossed. Out at night, he sits beneath the ash tree, muttering prayers no one taught him. Not Latin, not scripture, just sounds, shapes of sound that seem to settle into the soil like rain. He never told anyone what he saw the day Aldrich disappeared. But the raven that followed Aldrich now perches on the church roof. It stares at the priest's window and waits. Back in the woods, the door behind the mill shifts. Not open, not closed. Breathing, someone's handprint appears on the inside, too small to be Aldrich's, too wide to be Letha's single quotes as new, and far below. Beneath the foundation, where earth turns to stone and roots grow sideways, there's a sound like grinding. Not metal, not wood bone. Something is sharpening itself, preparing, and the wheel turns again. This time, faster. In the village, the midwife lights a lantern and opens her journal. The symbols from the mill's door have changed again. They now match the ones in her grandmother's final entry. The last line reads, "Do not let the third name be spoken." And beneath it, a single word, carved so deep into the parchment, the page is almost torn. Hollow. The village never had a name, but perhaps that was the name all along, not a title. A warning. Eld. Hollow, the hollow that remembers, and the wheel turns once more. Not in rhythm, in hunger. The wheel turns once more, not in rhythm, in hunger. And somewhere beneath the ancient timbers and layered dust of the mill, something stirs, something that has waited not years, but generations. No one heard it move, but they felt it. In the morning rose slower than usual. A fog hung low, clinging to doorposts and curling around rooftops like an old cat refusing to leave. Even the birds, normally chattering before dawn, held their voices back. Not in fear. In reverence. By the well, someone had scratched a symbol into the stone lip. Not deep, just enough to catch the light. No one admitted to doing it. No one touched it. But every passerby glanced at it. And then away. The cooper's house. One Letha vanished from stood, still and silent. A single curtain moved, despite no breeze, and in the forest, the wheel turned again. Not fast, but enough to groan, enough to echo at the church. The priest was not seen that morning, but the bell rang once, just once, and then no more. Inside his room, his journal lay open. On the final page, 7 names. 6 were crossed out. One was not. The 7th name, written in darker ink than the others. Fresh, bold. A child's name. No one would say it aloud. Not even the midwife. She had been up before dawn, pacing the edge of the village with a small bundle clutched to her chest. Herbs, ash, twine, 3 pebbles wrapped in linen. She didn't knock on doors. She didn't speak to anyone. But she paused before each threshold, muttered something soft and uneven, and left a mark in the dirt with her finger. A spiral, always a spiral. Back at the mill, the ground was changing. It wasn't sinking, it was remembering. The roots of the ash tree had begun to twist in unnatural ways, coiling above the soil like veins, rising to the surface of skin. Not rotten, not broken, just ... Wrong, and beneath the millstone floor. Beneath the boards, no one had walked for years. Something waited. The villagers began to whisper again. They whispered of sounds at night, not screams, not footsteps, whispers as if the trees themselves were trying to warn them, as if every leaf knew a secret and rustled to share it. They whispered about the child, who hadn't been seen since the last frost, about the shoes left neatly outside the door, the toy figure that still sat upright on the porch step. They whispered about the priest's last sermon, the one no one could remember, but all claimed they had heard. The baker's wife said it ended with a name that didn't belong to anyone, or maybe did. The tanner swore he saw the priest light the church candles upside down. The shepherd said he saw hoofprints in the nave, but no animal had entered. They all agreed on one thing. He had written something on the inside of the bell, and then he was gone. The bell hasn't rung since. At the edge of the village, a stranger arrived, wrapped in furs that smelled of river and pine, eyes shadowed by a heavy hood. He walked with a limp and carried nothing but a staff, made of bone. No one welcomed him. No one needed to. He went straight to the mill. The blackbird watched him from the trees. Silent, the wheel turned once, and the door at the back creaked open, not wide, just enough. The stranger entered without knocking, without pausing, and he did not come out. The villagers held their breath for a day, then 2, then 7, and still, the wheel turned, in the graveyard behind the church. New flowers began to bloom, out of season, out of place, blood-colored petals, white stems. No one had planted them, but they grew. The midwife called them Hollowroots. She said they only bloomed when something was taken unfairly, or when something was returned. She began boiling water that night, not for tea, for ink. She pulled down her grandmother's grimoire, the one no one was supposed to know existed. She tore a page from the back, and wrote a name, not a child. S, not hers. One older. The name of the first girl who vanished in Eldhollow. Her own sister. The page curled in the steam. The ink bled at the corners, but the name held. She folded the paper, bound it in wax, and walked to the mill. The wheel was still turning, slower now, as if watching her. She placed the folded name on the threshold, and turned away, behind her. The door creaked open wider. A sound soft and wet followed her steps, but she didn't look back, because some things should not be seen twice, that night. The village slept lighter than usual. Candles burned all the way down. Windows remained unlatched. Children dreamed of a girl in a gray dress, hair braided with red thread, holding a lantern made of ice. She didn't speak, but she pointed toward the mill, toward the roots, toward the hollow, and in the morning, the well was full again. The blackbird flew once around the village, then vanished. The priest's journal was gone. So was the page with the 7th name, but the wheel had stopped, and no one heard whispers in the trees that day. Not because they weren't speaking, but because for the first time in years, someone had answered. The midwife returned to her cottage, She lit a single candle and whispered something to the flame. A thank you, a warning, a promise, maybe all three. Then she slept, deeper than she had in decades, and in the morning, the mill door was shut. The path was gone, the roots receded, and the ash tree stood. Straight, not dead, not alive, just watching, always watching. The village said nothing. They returned to their chores, their baking, their children, their forgetfulness. But when someone asked what had happened to Aldrich, to Letha, to the others, the answer was always the same. They went to the mill, and that was enough. Because everyone in Eldhollow knew, some places are not meant to be mapped. Some names are not meant to be remembered. And some wheels are better left unmoving, still. Every so often when the mist rolls in early and the trees lean too far, the wind carries a single word. Not loud, not urgent, just ... present, a name, yours. Maybe you're someone you used to be, the kind of name that makes your skin forget how to warm, that makes the candle gutter without a breeze, that makes you remember you left the back door unlatched, and somewhere far away, a wheel begins to turn. A wheel begins to turn. Not loud, not fast, but certain, and in Eldhollow. The air thickens like fog that has forgotten how to lift. The birds do not sing. The wind does not stir. Even the mice in the granary pause, as if some older instinct tells them, wait. Not yet, because something is coming. Not with footsteps, not with fire, but with memory, and in a village that survives by forgetting. That is the cruelest thing of all. The path to the mill no longer exists. Not visibly, but people still find it. They don't mean to. A wrong turn behind the baker's oven. A shortcut past the dry creek bed. A trail of feathers that shouldn't be there in spring. And suddenly, there at the edge of the clearing, the mill stands. Silent, the door is shut, but the birds won't land near it. And the blackbird's feather still lies in the center of the path, undisturbed by wind or weather. At the inn, the midwife eats alone. She does not greet the innkeeper. She does not touch her bread. She just listens. Because tonight, the silence is too even, too careful, like a breath being held. Across the room, the youngest son of the shepherd has begun to hum. A tune no one recognizes. He hums it in time with his fingers, which tap the table in a pattern too old to be child's play. The midwife rises, walks to him and gently touches his hand. The boy goes silent. His fingers stop, and in that moment, every candle in the inn flutters, then steadies, but the pattern is remembered, not by the boy, by the floorboards. That night, the midwife returns home and unlocks a box. She swore she'd never open again. Inside, a vial of millstone dust, a broken comb with 3 teeth, and a single glove child stitched, with red thread in the shape of an eye. She places the glove on the WINDOW SILL dot and waits. In the morning, it is gone, in its place, a petal. Pale gray, paper thin, not from any flower that grows in Eldhollow. She wraps it in linen, tucks it into her book, then begins writing again. Not spells, not names, stories, because sometimes stories are the only words left. The wheel does not turn, but something underneath it does. It's not the door this time, it's the hinge of memory, and it swings open without sound. Elsewhere, far from the village though, no road leads truly away. A traveler awakens in the middle of the night, heart racing, breath sharp. He doesn't know why. He only knows he saw a dream of a house without windows, a spinning wheel that bled ink, a woman with no face offering him a cup of dust. He drinks it and wakes with dirt beneath his nails. He's never been to Eldhollow. He doesn't know it exists. But when he closes his eyes, he hums a tune, and his fingers tap a rhythm, and far away. In the inn, the shepherd's boy does the same. They've never met, but something remembers them both. Back at the church, ivy creeps down the bell tower, faster than it should. It grows over the windows, curling into shapes that resemble letters. The villagers avert their eyes, not out of fear, but because it looks too much like understanding. At night, the bell rings once. No one hears it. but everyone dreams of water, cold, rising, full of hands. The blackbird returns, not alone, this time. 3 others perch on the steeple. They do not sing, they only watch, and beneath the mill, something ancient exhales. For the first time in years, a voice is heard, not out loud. Inside it says, "The door remembers your name." And a child wakes up in the middle of the night, whispering the word. Before, the midwife gathers what she needs. A spool of twine soaked in salt, 3 pine needles bound in wax, and the small, sharp bone she hides beneath the hearth. She walks to the ash tree. The roots are calm now. Still, but if you press your ear to the trunk, you hear something, not whispering, not movement, a kind of scratching, like ink trying to crawl its way back up a page. She digs at the base, a little dot, just enough. She buries the bone, the thread, and then her own name, folded in half. She does not cry, but her shadow flickers, and when she leaves, the air smells like soot. 3 days pass, then 4. On the 5th night, every dog in the village begins to howl, not in fear, in recognition, as if something familiar has stepped across the threshold. Only the dogs can see it. They do not bark, they do not growl, they just bow their heads and whimper at sunrise. The mill door is gone, not broken, not ajar, just gone. A wall stands where it once was, seamless, but the markings are still there, burned into the wood. Now in a ring, spinning. Slowly the wheel is not moving, but the symbols are inside the inn. The shepherd's boy draws them in spilled ale, one by one perfectly. His eyes are open, but he is not awake. And when he finishes, he says a word in a language no one knows. But the floorboards creak like they do, and in the distance, the bell rings again. Twice, this time everyone hears it. Even the dead, because in the graveyard, the Hollowroots bloom again in full, in rows each. Blossom faces the mill. The midwife kneels beside the newest one. It's growing from the grave. With no name, she knows who's buried there. They all do, but no one has spoken it in 40 years, until now she says it once, softly, and the blossom withers instantly. Not rots, withers pulled back into the soil like it never belonged above it, and the wind picks up from nowhere, carrying a scent that should not be. Warm milk, ash, and old honey. The scent of memory of when the door first opened, of the cost they paid, and the promise that was never truly kept. The mill stands quiet, but the ground around it is changing. A spiral of pebbles, not placed, grown, rising slowly from the dirt, like old words coming back to the tongue. The blackbirds circled once, then twice, and vanish into the sky, leaving behind a single feather, gray taut, soft bent. At the tip, it lands in the center of the spiral, and does not move. Not even when the wind howls. The midwife sees it. She says nothing, she just turns and walks home. Tonight, she will write again, not in her book, on the wall, in chalk, a single sentence, over and over, until sleep takes her. If the door forgets, we remain, because it is not the wheel that brings the hollow, not the whispers, not the root. It is the forgetting, the denial, the silence, that is what it feeds on. And somewhere, not far, but not near, a traveler stirs. The one who drank the cup of dust, he hums again, and this time, he hums in perfect harmony with the child in Eldhollow. A song older than bone, a song that never truly ends, only waits for the door to open again. That word no longer echoed. It settled. It soaked into the walls of Eldhollow, like fog seeping through floorboards. It curled into the roots of the ash tree, ran the ridges of old bones buried to shallow, and stirred in the spaces behind closed doors. Again. The midwife woke with the taste of it on her tongue. Salt, dust, pine, smoke. She had dreamt of the millstone turning on its own, grinding, not grain, but teeth, human, clean, still warm in the dream. She hadn't screamed, she had listened, and the mill had whispered a name. Her mother's the sky, outside. Her cottage was too still, not dark, not light. That impossible hour when time forgets what it's doing. She rose and lit no candle. There was enough glow from the ash tree. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing. She walked barefoot to her hearth. There. She pulled free a strip of cloth hidden behind a loose stone, an old handkerchief, stitched with the symbol for binding. She had sewn it the night her sister was taken. Her fingers remembered. Even if her voice did not dot, she held it to her chest, whispered the word again, and the hearth cracked, a clean split, vertical, jagged like a bolt of lightning drawn in charcoal. From the crack came a sigh, not hot, not cold, but wet, as if the earth beneath had lungs. Outside, the first crow returned, not the blackbird. This one was wrong. Its feathers were the color of slate, with tips the shade of coal wet with rain. Its eyes glowed faint gold, like lanterns trimmed with sorrow. It landed on her roof, and waited in the barn across the field. The cows had pressed themselves against the farthest wall, lowing, not with hunger, but with unease. The chickens had buried their heads beneath their wings. The dogs in the village had gone silent again, not asleep, listening, because beneath Eldhollow, something had stirred, not risen, just remembered itself in the village square. A child began to hum. Not the shepherd's boy, another younger, blind, since birth. He sat in the dust and traced circles with his thumb, not looking, just feeling, and as he did, the stones beneath his hand began to move, not fast, barely at all, but enough. The old stones were shifting, not because of his fingers, because they remembered being part of something else, a gate, a pattern, a door. Back at the church, the ivy had finished its crawl. The bell tower now wore a cloak of green, so thick the stone was no longer visible. Where the vines curled together, faces began to form, not human, but close. Eyes where none should be. Mouths shut too tightly. Expressions not carved, but grown, each night. More appeared. No one dared ring the bell, because they knew now, it no longer summoned prayer. It summoned answer. In the millif, you could still find it. If you strayed too far from your path, or if you followed the spiral, the ground had changed. There were stairs now, stone cracked dust, less dot, each step lower than the last. As if gravity had forgotten to level the earth properly. There were no lights, but there was awareness, that strange sense of being watched by something with no eyes. Something with no eyes. Something that didn't need them. And if you went too far down, you'd begin to forget your name. Not instantly, just in pieces. First, your middle name, then your favorite color, then your reflection, and finally your reason for coming at the bottom. There was a door, wood simple, but breathing each inhale. Sigh of ashdot. Each exhale the scent of stone. No handle, just a space. The shape of a hand, small, like a child's, or someone who had been young when the door was last opened. The midwife had seen it in dreams. But now she stood before it, not by walking, but by being known. The earth had led her, not with roads, with memory, and memory in Eldhollow is the most treacherous guide of all. She did not touch the door. She simply waited until it opened on its own. Behind it, not light, not shadow, something else, a color that should not exist, a sound that made her bones recall storms never lived. And from within that space, something stepped forward. Small dot cloaked, holding a lantern, but the flame inside was not fire. It was stillness, the kind that silences oceans, that freezes voices mid-prayer. And the figure said one word, Det, then turned and walked away. The door remained open, but she did not enter. She understood now. Eldhollow was not cursed. It was collateral, a village paid forward against an older promise, one the ancestors made, one they forgot, but memory true. Memory doesn't sleep, it waits. It writes itself into roots, into wheels, into hands that hum old songs without knowing why. The midwife stepped back. The earth did not resist, but the spiral on the ground glowed, faintly behind her, like an old coin catching candlelight, like an eye. Blinking, she returned to the surface, to her cottage, to the crow. It was gone, but on her table, laid carefully beside her cup, was a single black thread, wrapped around a tooth. Human, small, unmistakable, she wept not for fear, for clarity. She had carried the debt, but now it had a name again, and names, in Eldhollow, are keys. The wheel had not turned, but it had spoken, and it was almost time to listen. She had carried the debt, but now it had a name again, and names, in Eldhollow, are keys. The wheel had not turned, but it had spoken, and it was almost time to listen. The midwife placed the tooth on the windowsill. It did not roll, it did not shine, it simply waited, as if it knew more waiting would be required. Outside, the wind rose again, not a storm, but a whisper in many voices, each one faint, each one distant. None of them belonged to anyone still living. Across the village, things that had long been still began to move. A locked chest beneath the floorboards of the baker's shop shifted with a low thud. Inside, bundles of herbs bound with red string untouched for decades shivered loose. Their scent filled the air like burnt rosemary and forgotten lullabies. In the schoolhouse, now abandoned, the chalk on the blackboard began to draw on its own circles, then a spiral, then 3 vertical lines intersected by one horizontal slash, a sigil so old even the soil remembered it. A mark carved into the foundation stone beneath the mill, a symbol last drawn by the child who vanished, barefoot, holding a single dandelion that had not yet bloomed. The mill hadn't taken her. It had called her, because the roots had remembered her name, and she had whispered it back, not aloud, in her breath, in her humming, in the rhythm of her bare feet against the ground. Now, that rhythm returned to Eldhollow, to its fields, to the space beneath its cottages, where the worms trembled, and the stones no longer slept. The midwife did not sleep. Either she began to walk, not down the road, not through the village, but around it, clockwise. 7 times, at each corner of the fields. She stopped, not to rest, to speak. Not words, sounds. Tones, older than speech. The first, the hum of sap inside bark. The second, the creak of a rocking cradle with no child inside. The third, the sound of a blanket being folded before anyone has risen. The fourth, a breath inhaled, but never exhaled. The fifth, the pause between thunder and rain. The sixth, the scraping of a comb through hair that isn't there. And the seventh, a single word. The word she buried long ago, Onwin. The name of the girl who never returned. Her sister. The silence that followed swallowed the entire village. Even the wind stopped. Even the ivy held its breath. And beneath the church, the soil cracked, not visibly, but deeply. The kind of break only roots can feel. The kind that spreads. The millstone pulsed once, no. One saw, but many felt it. Their dreams twisted, their feet itched, their reflections in bowls of water blinked when they did not, and the traveler, who had never seen Eldhollow, sat up. Suddenly cold, he no longer remembered where he was going, but he knew where he had to arrive. His feet bled, but they kept moving, and the humming in his head was now joined by a second voice, not his, a girl's single, quotes, as soft, patient, and unbearably familiar. The crows watched from trees that no longer bore leaves, not because it was autumn, because the trees had begun to listen, and listening takes more than leaves. Back beneath the mill, the door breathed again, still open, still waiting, but something new had begun to rise, not a figure, not a shadow, of scent. Honey and iron. The midwife returned to her cottage. On her doorstep lay the tooth again, but now it was wrapped in linen. Inside the linen, another item, a tiny boot, woven from grass, with a drop of dried blood at the heel. She did not touch it. She only whispered, "You remember," and the wind gently replied, "She called us first." In the night, the Hollowroots bloomed again, not in the graveyard, in the fields, in the shape of a spiral large, enough to be seen from the bell tower, but no one dared climb it, not because of the height, because of the eyes they had returned. dozens. Pale, blinking, staring. From the ivy dot, from the stones, from the very bark of the ash tree. And they were all looking at the same place. The mill, or rather, what lay beneath it. A space that was no longer hidden, no longer sealed. It did not shine, it did not glow, but it felt closer, like it had been. Buried just behind your breath, and now it had stepped forward. One breath closer. The villagers did not speak of it, but they stopped singing. They stopped praying. Even the children no longer played near the wells, because the echoes came back too quickly with answers. On the 6th day, the traveler arrived. He did not knock on any doors. He walked to the spiral, and without asking, stepped into its center. The Hollowroots did not resist him. They folded back, like opening a book, and beneath them, stone, a lid, carved with the same sigil. As on the schoolhouse board, he touched it, and it opened. No hinges, no lock, just permission, and beneath the stone, steps he descended, and did not scream. The midwife felt it, a tug in the air, a pressure behind. The eyes, she did not hesitate. She gathered her bag, tied back her hair, and followed. Not with fear, with recognition. She knew now what the debt had always been. Not pain, not blood. Memory, the right to forget. The luxury of ignorance. That was what the village had bartered. And now the door had come to collect. She walked the spiral in reverse. The Hollowroots did not bloom for her. They closed. And in their closing, a hum began. Not one voice, hundreds. The villagers were singing. Again, not aloud, not in words, but in memory, in fragments, in smells, in lullabies. Half-dash remembered, and each hum became a step. Each step a promise, each promise a price. The door beneath, the mill opened wider. No longer a slit, a wound, a mouth, and it began to speak. Not in language, in weight. The weight of secrets, unbew, of names long buried, of children never returned. And as the midwife stepped into the threshold, she heard it. The wheel turning, slowly, painfully, grinding again. But not grain, not teeth, time, and in its rhythm, Onwin's voice, calling home. The wheel was turning again. Not fast, not with fire or noise, but slowly, grating against the buried bones of time, against the stone grooved with secrets, against the ribs of the earth. And as it turned, the air changed. Not temperature, not scent. Wait, every breath felt borrowed, every blink, a decision. And the shadows longer now did not match the shapes that cast them. The midwife stood beneath the mill. The spiral had closed behind her, not as a trap, but as a promise. Once you remember, you cannot go back. The stairway curved deeper, impossibly deep. No torch, no lantern, but she could see, not with her eyes, with something else, a memory not her own. And in that memory a room, octagonal, walled and bones, not human, but near enough, and in the center, the child. Her sister, Nwyn, but older, not aged, changed. She stood barefoot, hair white as linen, skin like wet ash. Her eyes were open, but unfocused. Pupils ringed with spirals in her hand. A lantern, no flame, just a soft pulse, like the breath of the first story ever told. The midwife stepped closer, not rushed, not afraid. She had waited too. Longed to be afraid now. Onwin tilted her head and spoke a name. But it wasn't hers. It was the name of the village, not Eldhollow, the name before, the one they had buried. She whispered it again, and the bones in the wall trembled. The wheel above groaned, and in the fields, every scarecrow turned its head. They had no eyes, but they saw, because names real, names are not forgotten, they're hidden. Beneath layers of silence, beneath weddings and funerals and harvests, beneath prayers mouthed without meaning. But names never die. They wait, and they listen. Onwin extended her hand in it. A root, still bleeding, not from the earth, from memory. The midwife took it, and the room sighed. The bones on the walls pulled tighter. Shapes formed, faces, dozens, villagers, old ones, too old. Some she had seen in paintings, others only in dreams. Their mouths opened, but no sound. Instead, the pulse of the lantern grew brighter, not burning, beating a rhythm, and that rhythm carried words. Not spoken, imposed. Double quotes. The debt was memory. The price was forgetting. The cost is due. The midwife understood. The village had once known too much. Not magic, not sin, truth about what was beneath the roots, about who they were, about what the wheel really ground. They had chosen to forget, to sleep, to live in peace, but the wheel never truly stopped, and now it wanted to be remembered, above. The birds fell silent again. The trees stilled. The moon paused. Time itself bent slightly, like a door left ajar. The traveler had followed his own spiral. Now he stood at the altar of something older than gods. The Hollowroots had grown taller, blooming into impossible patterns, rings within rings. Vines forming language, a prayer, a warning. He spoke it aloud, and the ground beneath him accepted the offering. Blood from his feet, sweat from his brow. The last tear he would ever cry. The Hollowroots parted, and he was gone. The villagers began to hum. They didn't know why, but they had heard the name. Now, not from lips, from soil, and the soil had memory. In the octagonal room, the walls began to rotate, not mechanically, with intent. A spiral within the spiral, and behind the bones, another layer emerged, with painted faded symbols, curling runes, lines drawn in crushed berry and soot. A story, the true story, of how the village was founded, not by settlers, by survivors, of a forgetting, of a silence, purchased with a promise that the wheel would be fed, not with bodies, not with sacrifice, but with unawareness, and for generations. It had worked, until a child had remembered. Onwin, she hadn't spoken it. She had drawn it, in the dust, in her sleep. With her humming, she had awakened the spiral. Not cursed it, not called it, just remembered. And memory is what the wheel drinks deepest. The midwife placed the bleeding root against her heart. The lantern flared. Not fire, not light, but clarity. And the bones in the wall began to whisper names, dates, secrets, the names of those who had vanished, not taken, given, willingly, too. Keep the forgetting alive, and now the forgetting had ended. Eldhollow would remember, or it would not exist at all. Onwin smiled. Not joy, not malice, something deeper, like a tree, recognizing the hand that planted it. She stepped forward, laid the lantern in her sister's hand. The midwife did not flinch. She let it rest there, and felt the pulse of the first story. She remembered her own birth, her mother's voice, the smell of peat and wet bark, the way the stars looked the night. Her sister vanished. She remembered it all, and she wept, because forgetting had been a comfort, but it had never been a cure. Behind her, the spiral opened. Not into the village, into before. A field of ashdot, and at its center, a great wheel, stone spiked, turning endlessly around it. The bones of those who had bargained, priests, midwives, children, one man with no face, and a child with too many. Onwin led her sister forward, toward the wheel. The midwife did not hesitate. The wheel stopped, for the first time in centuries, and opened, inward, not to darkness, to origin, to the first forgetting, to the place where silence was born. And in stepping through, the sisters remembered everything. The price, the promise, the reason. And in the village, the ash tree bloomed red, its petals made of names, each one whispered by the wind, each one a key. And in the fields, the Hollowroots bent low, like heads in prayer, and the scarecrows bowed, and the crows sang, not in caws, in names. And so the mill turned, one last time, grinding memory into dust. But the dust did not scatter. It settled, it waited, it watched, and the village was quiet again, but not because it forgot, because it finally understood. The roots were listening, not just the Hollowroots, with their soft glow and secrets. All of them, even the small twisted ones beneath the stone paths. even the hairline filaments that reached into cupboards and floors and dreams. They listened now. Not for gossip, not for prayers, for truth, because the truth had finally been spoken again, and it would not return to silence. The spiral beneath. The ash tree widened until it became a gate, not carved, not forced, remembered, and through it walked the two sisters, one with ash in her hair, and the other with time beneath her skin. Behind them, the bones wept, not for sorrow, for relief. The midwife and Onwin walked side by side, yet their shadows did not match their steps. Onwin's shadow was longer, older, and hers split as she moved, fracturing into 5, then 7, then none at all. Beneath them, the stone path was alive with carvings that shifted as they passed. Rings, circles, keys. 1,000 symbols in a language older than breath. The sisters did not read them. They knew them. They were born of them, and they were going home. But this home was not the village, not Eldhollow. It was the place. Before Eldhollow, before the debt by for the forgetting, a plain of stone and grassless soil, beneath a sky that did not shimmer or blink. The stars here did not move. They remembered their places, because they, too, had once made a bargain. In the center of the plain stood a house, not a cottage, not a temple. A house made of every material memory could provide: bones, books, feathers, melted candles, braided hair, broken bowls. Each layer told a story. Each door opened inwards. The midwife stepped through the first threshold. The air did not change. She did. Her back straightened, her fingers warmed, and a name formed. On her lips, not her own, but herself. Nonetheless, a name from before the midwifery, before the wheel, before even the first. Forgetting, the house welcomed her, not with light, with acceptance. The dust swirled in shapes that curled toward her hands. They missed her. The chairs, crooked and mismatched, arranged themselves. The hearth flared blue flame. No wood, just presence. Onwin moved differently. Now she did not walk, she glided, not supernatural, familiar, like returning to a hallway you helped build. She placed the lantern without flame on a table of mirrors. It pulsed. Once, twice, then opened inside. Not light, not fire, not heat. A voice, old, dry cracked, like old stone, and first rain. Who brings memory to the root? Onwin answered. She who broke the circle. And who remembers the first bargain? The midwife whispered, I do. And the floor sank, not in collapse. In invitation they descended again. No stairs, just gravity obeying memory. And at the bottom, while still, dark, wider than the fields. Its rim sat a figure, not human, but not other, made of ash and wind and threads. No eyes, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. You come late, it said. No, said the midwife. We come finally. It nodded. 1,000 spiders shifted in its shoulders. Not threatening, merely present. We never wanted blood, the figure said. We wanted truth, but no one would carry it. The sisters said nothing, because truth does not need agreement. It only needs space. The well began to speak. Not in voice, in memory. Images, flashes, a village lush green, full of laughter. A spiral drawn in the earth. Not feared, but celebrated. Children born with songs already in their throats. Midwives who spoke with trees. Fathers who heard the roots. Mothers who spun truth into thread. And then the forgetters came. Men in red eyes, hollow. Voices like knives. They brought silence in baskets. They poured it into wells, into mouths. And they made a bargain. Forget, or be forgotten. The villagers chose survival. They gave the wheel a task. Turn the memories to dust. Hide the names. Lock the door. But the door was not the problem. The forgetting was. Because when truth is buried, it grows crooked. It became hunger. It became drought. It became silence. Until a child hummed again. Until a sister walked backwards 7 times. Until a spiral opened. And now, The well was ready to be closed, or to be made whole. Onwin stepped forward. She held the bleeding root, the lantern, the name. She dropped them in. No splash, just a wind. And suddenly, every name ever spoken in Eldhollow rang through the well. Children's names, dead names, unborn names, even the names of tools and streams and paths. Every name that had ever mattered. The figure at the rim stood and became smoke, and the wheel above ground stopped, then reversed, grinding backward, undoing. Silence. The villagers began to wake, not from sleep, from forgetting. Old men wept over tools they didn't remember making. Mothers sang songs they didn't know they knew. The baker opened a drawer and found a loaf shaped like a spiral, still warm after 30 years. Even the trees leaned closer, their rings reshaping, relearning the seasons, relearning the truth at the house made of memory. The roof caught fire, not flame, memory. It burned gently, it burned blue, and as it burned, it whispered the first bargain's true end. Not forgotten, not forsaken, only sleeping. The midwife stepped from the house. The field had returned. The path to Eldhollow, visible now, but the village was not the same. It glowed, not with fire. With remembrance. The spiral had been drawn in every window. Children wore them on their sleeves. The well had a name again, the wheel. A purpose, not grinding grain. Telling time, the right time. The old time, the true time, and in the wind. Onwin's voice again, not from her mouth, from the roots. She had stayed behind, not trapped, planted, to keep the remembering alive. The midwife knelt in the field, planted her hand, felt the rhythm, not a curse, a heartbeat. The wheel turned once more, not to grind, to sing, and the song went like this. I remember, you remember, we remember, and we will not forget again. The spiral didn't close. It rested like a breathing chest, still rising, still falling. The wheel had stopped grinding memory, but it had not ceased to turn. Now it spun with new rhythm, not forgetting, listening. Listening. Eldhollow had remembered itself. But memory is not a wall, it is a path. And at the end of every remembered path, a door waits. This one was made of stone, not cut, not carved, formed from the collective silence of 100 winters, from every unspoken grief, every lullaby hummed, instead of sung, every name whispered only in sleep. The midwife stood before it, alone, now, but not lonely. The village thrummed behind her like a drum made of roots. Children spun in circles, drawing spirals in the dust without being taught. The wheel above the old mill ticked once per hour now, each click echoing into the Hollowroots, keeping time with the memory of the world. Onwin had not returned, not as a girl, not as a woman, but her voice was in everything. The way the leaves are led, the way old spoons tilted in bowls, the way shadows curved around corners just slightly too early. The stone door before the midwife had no handle. It had a shape, a hollow, spiral-shaped indentation at chest height. She pressed her hand to it, not forced, given it accepted. The door pulsed, then sank back, not swinging, not cracking, just melting away into the rock around it. Beyond, a stairless descent, straight, down, lit by nothing but warm. She stepped into it. The earth swallowed her calmly. The deeper she went, the more she felt, not just with her skin, but with her memory. Smells she hadn't known she missed. Linen left too long in the rain. Wheat before it's cut. Ash from a fire put out too fast. Sounds. To doubt her father humming. Her sister's laugh. Echoing in a copper pot. The dry scrape of a quill on bark. They weren't hallucinations. They were stored here like books. Like relics. Each step downward was a page turned, until at last, she stood at the bottom. There was no room. Just a space, round, breathing, at its center. A stone. Knee height. Unremarkable, except for the feeling it gave her. A knowing, as if it had always been waiting, not to be found. To be acknowledged. She knelt beside it, placed her palm upon it, The stone warmed, and spoke not in words. In truth, it showed her the first village. Not Eldhollow. The one before. Before names, before bargains. A place where time and memory were one thread. Where people walked through one another's dreams to visit. Where no one aged unless they chose to. Not immortality, consent, and from that place, the spiral was born. Not as symbol, as compass. For when the first people grew weary of eternity, they did not die. They spiraled inward. Into soil, into story, into stone. They gave up their names, so the land could name itself. They gave up their faces, so that trees might remember wind, and one of them had become the stone before her. The listener, the stone did not want worship. It wanted witness to be touched, to be heard, to be heard, to be known again. Because the silence was growing again. Not in Eldhollow, in the world beyond, forgetting too wide to name, and the spiral could not hold it. Alone, the wheel could turn, the roots could whisper, but without the witness, the forgetting would return, in different shape. More polite, perhaps. More modern, but just as cruel. So the stone made a request, not demand, a gift asked in return. Stay, it said. Listen, for them. The midwife looked up, no roof above. Her dot, just memory woven like a canopy. Faces she hadn't seen in years. Some not born yet. Some never born at all. She nodded. The village would remember, but she would remain. The last link, the listener to the listener. The spiral to the spiral. She lay down beside the stone, closed her eyes, and dreamed herself into it. Not death. Continuation. Her thoughts now etched in the root. Systems. Her hum echoed in wells. She became the voice heard in wind. Chimes that never move. In babies that smile at corners. In the sudden scent of ash. In summer. And so the silence was held at bay. Not broken. Balanced. Eld. Hollow woke the next morning with a slight ringing in every ear. No pain, just presence. Of knowing the midwife was gone. But her house stood. Warmer than before. Her tools arranged in spirals. A note, unreadable, but felt. Every child born since carried a mark somewhere. A birthmark, like a coil, a curl in the hair, a tendency to turn wit. Before sleep the wheel above the mill ticked once, twice, then sang. A low hum. Felt in boots. End, in the deep root cellars, the Hollowroots bloomed again. This time, white. They no longer glowed, they radiated. And every villager had a dream that night, the same one, of a spiral, of a house, a woman sitting beside a stone, singing, but not words, just understanding. And no one forgot it come morning. Even the goats stood still at sunrise, eyes half-lidded, as if trying to remember a name they'd never been given. The village festival that year was different. No ribbons, no contests, just bread, stew, laughter, and beneath it, all knowing that something had shifted. Not broken, not ended, just realigned and far below. The spiral pulsed once, then rested, not to sleep, but to wait. Because time will spiral again. And when it does, there will be a stone, there will be a hum, and someone must listen. The stone still listens, but not alone. It no longer waits. In cold silence it hums in harmony, because the midwife stayed, and through her, the village learned not to shout, not to chant, but to remember, and remembering in Eldhollow became an act of love. The kind of love that does not seek, that does not demand, but simply holds. The year after her vanishing, the children began drawing spirals in the fields, not from command, not from ritual, but because it felt correct. They said it made the soil softer, and it did. Plants bent toward the shapes. Rainwater found them and curled inside. Even birds adjusted their flight paths to follow the loops. Something beneath the world had realigned, but it was gentle, almost bashful. It did not demand parades or temples. It asked only to be known, and one by one. Every home in Eldhollow answered, with offerings not of gold or blood, but of memory. A shoelace from a dead brother. The smell of a late grandmother's stew, captured in a folded cloth. A laugh remembered, and written down phonetically, just so someone else might one day speak it again. These offerings were placed at the old well, which was no longer old. It had become sacred, not in the religious sense, in the way that a heartbeat becomes sacred after you thought it had stopped. And the well answered, not with magic, but with consistency. Water always came, even in drought. It smelled faintly of time, and it never flooded, never dried. Some said it tasted different to every person. Like snowmelt, like ash, like soup from a long-forgotten night of joy. It didn't matter. It was theirs. It had always been. And now it remembered that too. The wheel above the mill never ground grain again, but it spun every day. Once for morning, once for dusk, and once again at midnight. A reminder that time is a spiral, not a line. And in the deepest cellars, Hollowroots stretched further than they ever had. Through rock, through old bone, even through dream, yes, dream. Because, by the third year, the village began dreaming the same dreams. Not always, not every night, but often enough to know it was not coincidence. They would wake with the same image in their mind, a woman, sitting beside a low stone, not humming, never speaking, always humming. And her song changed the soil. The song softened stone. It reversed the cracking of bark, stitched old paths back into new maps. No one questioned it. They just began humming to farmers, hummed to their seeds. Children hummed while collecting beetles. Bakers hummed into their ovens and found loaves baked twice as fast, and late at night. When the wind moved through the Hollowroot fields, it carried more than air. It carried understanding. One old man, toothless, nearly forgotten, stood up in the middle of a gathering and recited every name of every child born in Eldhollow in the last 50 years. Then he sat back down. He didn't know how he knew, but everyone wept and the children bowed, because somehow, even they knew, they were part of a long circle now, no longer floating through time like dust. They were anchored, spiral, born, bound, by love, by memory, by truth, and truth, once spoken fully, cannot be taken back. One afternoon, long after the midwife had vanished into stone, a visitor arrived, dust on her boots, a face unfamiliar, but eyes that recognized. She did not ask for directions. She walked straight to the well, kissed the rim dot, and whispered a word in a language no one recognized, but felt. She carried a satchel of things wrapped in wax cloth, a broken locket, a spiral-shaped bone, a coin with no emperor, a fragment of blue sky. Trapped in glass, she placed them at the base of the well, not as gifts, as returnings. She didn't speak, didn't stay, just nodded once and left. The villagers understood. She had come home, even if she'd never lived here. That evening, the wheel turned 4 times, once for morning, once for dusk, once for midnight, and once for the return. It never did that again, but everyone remembered, and that was enough. Stories began to change, not by deletion, by expansion. The fire tales told. 2 children added new characters. A girl who talked to roots, a wheel that could sing, a stone that knew your name, even if you'd never spoken it aloud. And they weren't framed as fairy tales. They were just known the way you know, where your mother hides the bread, or where the warmest patch of grass is before the frost. Known lived, felt, and not just in Eldhollow. Because spirals spread, not by map, by hum, by wind, by dream. A baker in a distant city started drawing spirals into his loaves without knowing why. A seamstress began stitching them into sleeves. A soldier carved one into a tree before a battle and survived despite all odds. And slowly, the world began to feel less lonely, not perfect, not cured, but tethered again to something ancient, something gentle, something true. Somewhere very deep beneath a tree, older than maps, the stone still hums. The midwife's hum is joined by others now, mothers, fathers stillborn, names, forgotten lullabies, the echoes of laughter that had nowhere to live before, and the spiral keeps turning. not as punishment, as promised. The village of Eldhollow does not appear on maps, but if you dream correctly, you can still find it. Just follow the song, the one that says, "I am not lost. You are not gone. We are not broken, only waiting to be remembered." And if you kneel beside a well long enough, it will remember you too. Not loudly, not with thunder, just a small, slow hum. In your bones, that says, softly, "Welcome home."